Hey everyone, this is James from TDB bringing you another Inbetweenisode. Today I am going to be talking about a different topic. We'll not be drinking tea today on this episode, but I'm going to be talking about kind of aha moments in tea and sort of leveling up. I'll talk a little bit about what that means. I did release a blog post on this same sort of topic, so go ahead, check that out. A lot of that stuff, the same stuff I'll be talking about in this video is kind of spelled out in more of a written form here. So one thing that happens in tea is sometimes you're going to learn things very, very slowly. You're going to grind it out. And I think for me at least, this is kind of like my default image of learning. It's like putting in time, putting repetitions, and just slowly over time, just increasing your knowledge. But other times, there really can be kind of like this aha moment or this time where you're just going to immediately kind of raise your knowledge or your baseline for tea. So one anecdote that I talk about in the article is with Sichuan cuisine. So it's with food. It's not with tea necessarily. So, you know, I am half Chinese. My mom is Cantonese and I'm Cantonese. And so that's the type of Chinese food that I grew up with. It's also not uncommon for most of the people in America, including people of non-Chinese descent, to grow up kind of with this sort of cuisine. A lot of the Chinese food you're going to get in America is influenced or very Canto-inspired, American Chinese food especially. So it's the type of food I grew up with. And, you know, China's a very big place. There's a lot of different cuisines. They have the 5 famous cuisines. They got the 13 famous cuisines, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of that you don't necessarily get exposed to in America. That's starting to change a little bit. But one thing I got introduced to in my early 20s was a restaurant that was called Sichuan cuisine. And it served Sichuanese cuisine, which is a region in China. It's actually a very famous food region in China. And they have a lot of different dishes that are quite different from kind of the Cantonese food that I was used to. So things like twice cooked pork, boiled fish. They have a flavor profile that's kind of called mala. So basically it means numbing spice as well as spicy spice. So if you're not familiar, numbing comes from a Sichuan peppercorn that kind of literally does have this numbing effect on your mouth. And so this restaurant introduced me to a bunch of food. I really liked it. I ended up bringing my girlfriend at the time, who then became my wife at some point, and my parents, and so they all liked it. So it was one of those restaurants we consistently went to. We went to other places that served Sichuanese cuisine. Most of it was, you know, more or less on the same level. Some of it was a little bit better, some of it was a little bit worse, but not dramatically different from there. And so fast forward quite a few years to, 2020, 2021. There was a new restaurant opening up in Seattle, in the International District here, called Chengdu Taste. And so this place had a very, very strong reputation. It's a chain. Their original location, I believe, is located in San Gabriel Valley. If you're not familiar with San Gabriel Valley, it's kind of considered probably the best place to get different sorts of Chinese food, with the exception of perhaps Cantonese food in North America. And on the surface level, a lot of the dishes had a lot of overlap. So you have things, again, like twice cooked pork, kung pao chicken, boiled fish. So very Sichuanese dishes. So things that are not dramatically different from Sichuan cuisine. But anyways, my wife and I, being curious, we definitely checked it out as soon as we could. And it became immediately obvious that this was a beast of a different kind. It was just on another level for that. Of course, the flavor profiles, if you were to just write them out, they sound very similar, but the pungency and the just intensity of the food was much, much higher. In particular, the numbing was on another level. And so, you know, in the time in between getting introduced to Sichuan cuisine and Chengdu Taste, I became curious. I cooked some of these dishes on my own. But it's an example where my own cooking immediately improved to a level that I enjoyed much more, because I got introduced to this different reference point that made the food just on another level. And it made me really realize that, you know, Sichuan cuisine, there's a time and place for it. My parents still like it, even though I've introduced them to Chengdu Taste. But it is, a fairly watered down version that's made a little bit more palatable. So I really like Chengdu Taste. My wife does as well. So it's definitely one of our kind of more favored restaurants in Seattle. And the intensity of the food is definitely on a different level than, you know, your average Sichuan place that you may have gone to. So that's an example of just like having this aha moment where you kind of improve your knowledge and you can contextualize things just a little bit better. That happens probably not even before I finish the entire meal, the first meal that I had at Chengdu Taste. So yeah, that's definitely become one of my more favorite restaurants there. So how does this relate to tea? Well, you can have very similar moments when it comes to tea. I told this example just because I think it can be applied to different kind of aspects of life, but aged oolongs and woolly oolongs, I would say these are two categories of tea where in, my maybe second or third year of drinking tea, seriously, I had moments where I was like, oh wow, okay, I think I understand this tea on a little bit of a different level. A lot of it being introduced to the right tea at the right part of your tea journey. So, for instance, woolly oolongs is an example. So both of these happened with a old vendor called Origin Tea, who had a very short existence, but it was a very formative for myself, but a very, very great vendor for what they did. And for woolly tea, they had a $1 shui xian. And up until that point, I'd had a lot of different tea. I had shui xian, I had rogle, da hong pao, tel do han, etc., etc., etc. And so I was like, okay, let's try this tea. And I didn't really expect too much out of it. I mean, after all, it was just a shui xian. And I realized immediately that it was just a much better tea. And again, on the surface level, the tasting notes, very, very similar. But the texture and the richness of the tea and the way it lingered in the mouth was just so much better than what I had had up to that point. And I had had dozens of woolly up to that point. So it's a good example of just being like, oh wow, this is something else. And now one could say, oh, did that ruin the experience for you because now you have to seek this out every time? I understand that point of view. I don't feel exactly the same about that. In fact, I would say I drink mostly yancha woolly oolong that is significantly beneath the level of that tea. And I'm perfectly happy to drink that on just kind of an ongoing basis, because the reality is the really good stuff is rare, as is the case for, as you're peaking up as far as like kind of high quality tea goes, it's rare and it's expensive. So it's just not realistic to be drinking that every day. I think a lot of just kind of satisfaction is being satisfied with what you are able to afford and to drink and appreciating it on that specific level. So yeah, I also had a similar experience with aged oolongs where, you kind of realize that, wow, up to this point, a lot of the aged oolongs I've had are kind of shitty or very expensive, and oftentimes both, or re-roasted. And so, yeah, he's a vendor that kind of just really introduced me to these sorts of categories of tea. Would this have happened at some point? With the woolly oolongs, I think it probably would have, but it probably happened significantly earlier as a result. With aged oolongs, maybe, maybe not. I don't totally know. So yeah, you have to also want to kind of like level up. It's like my parents still prefer kind of the more watered down of Sichuan cuisine. So do both of my sisters. They both love that place, even though I have tried multiple times to introduce them to Chengdu Taste. That's fine. Sometimes, the learning is also, last concluding thought really is sometimes learning is really more linear and more of a grind. You bang out samples and it happens naturally. And sometimes there are these big moments. So wanted to just share some thoughts on that and just talk about sometimes how learning can happen in these unexpected spurts, and other times it's just, slow and linear. And there is definitely room and space for both. So thank you for tuning in. Let me know if you have any thoughts on this in between episode, and I will see y'all next time. Cheers.